Hi everyone, my name is Jen Tellifer. I'm the Academic Programs Coordinator at the School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape at the University of Calgary. Welcome to our information session. Here we're going to cover studio and portfolios today. Please note we are recording this for future use. Before we get started, we would like to acknowledge and pay tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. By the signing of Treaty 7 in 1877, the university recognizes that we are all treaty people. We have 2 or 3 of our professors here today to help describe to everybody what a studio course is like from each of their respective programs, as well as offering insight and tips around preparing your application portfolio and what the admissions committees are looking for. We will then hold a question and answer period where you can either text your questions in the chat and I'll read them, or you can text a question and then I'll call on you to ask it when the time comes. I'm not sure if Chris Fox has joined us yet, but I'm going to introduce our 3 professors we will have. Is Chris Fox is from Landscape Architecture program, Francisco Alani-Zarebe is from our planning program, and Jason Johnson is from our architecture program. I think, Francisco, if you're okay to start.
Sure, I can start. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for having me, Jen, and maybe able to provide a little bit of this context for you guys. So basically what we had in mind is to first kind of talk a little bit about what studio is. Some of you might be familiar with this, but some of you might be really new to this concept. So the studio, I guess we can talk about it in 2 pieces. One is what a type of course that is the core of our programs, but also it's a bit of a culture behind that as well. So what the course of a studio course is basically what we call, in terms of the way we teach and transfer knowledge, as experiential learning. So is based on learning by doing and is always project focused. So based on the project, is through this project is where you establish a lot of the skills and knowledge and discussion all revolves about around the project or series of projects. And this is what we call it experiential learning, because you have to really work through the project by doing that you are gaining these skills. And the core, this is the core of all of programs. In terms of the planning program, we have now 5 studios, and the series of studios, there are building up skills from, let's say, more elementary to very complex projects towards the very end of your program, where your final project really tries to replicate what you will be doing in a professional practice. And you go through this, we help you through this. And this is what is really fun, interesting, and interactive thing about the studio, is that you work not only with us as your instructors, but with your fellow students. So we have a policy, an approach within our faculty that we have sort of a ratio of around 12, 15 students to 1 instructor. And this ratio allows for having a lot of interaction between the instructor and the students, so that we can work through that project with you as a way to develop your skills and have discussions around the decisions that you make throughout the process, through making the project. And the project is all the time is design oriented. So design is basically trying to solve a series of problems, series of challenges. And depending on the program, I mean, I don't want to speak about the other programs too much. Jason and Chris will talk about that. But it's the scale and the focus of the project. So in terms of planning, we start with a lot of focus on the public realm, which is pretty much every space that is civic space, that is public. So is the street, the parks, plazas, and all of the spaces that are interacting within the public realm and the buildings, let's say the private property. So a lot of the initial skills are about to understanding the space and also designing for this space. And what I mentioned also about the culture of it, and that is, well, now it's a bit challenging with COVID, but that everybody hopes that is going to revert to our usual, is this culture of working together, not only through the class hours, but also you will be provided a space in our faculty where you are, you have your desk and you can work through these projects, and you are surrounded by your cohort of classmates. So in many cases, some of those classmates will be working with you in the same project. So in planning, there's a lot of group work, groups of 2, groups of 3. There are some of these complex projects. So by working in groups, you're helping each other, you're learning from each other. In many cases, you come from different cultures, or even within Canada, different locations. And all of that helps in the discussions around your project. Your background is always part of these conversations. And working in this environment is also provides the opportunity to a lot of peer-to-peer, classmate-to-classmate learning. And that's what I mean about the culture. Being in this space, working together, having different approaches, sharing experiences. And I mean, my background is in architecture, and later on I'm moving to planning. And in both cases, it was a lot about studio work. And you help each other. You have questions about, some of the basic stuff about the software, or about the space or the site you're working on. So having that culture of working together in the same space is really enriching. While it's challenging right now with COVID, we have tried to make arrangements for that. But in the future, I think we're going to go back to this format, and it will be quite a great experience. And that's why it's so important, as this is the core of our program. I'll pass it on to I don't know, Jason or Chris, who's next, but you guys.
I think Chris can carry on from here. Thanks, Francisco.
All right. So I'm Chris Fox. I'm a licensed landscape architect, and similar to Francisco, I have a varied background with at least 2 of the disciplines represented, because I also have a background in planning. And I teach in both programs, and have actually worked professionally as both a planner and a landscape architect. So, that gives me a certain perspective. And I'd say the big thing is that, and I'm sure everyone will say this, but it's good to get, especially with landscape architecture, an understanding of what the profession actually is. And there's a lot of misconceptions about what we do. And, we're not glorified gardeners. You could get a PhD in this. So what is it exactly? If we boil it down, perhaps, to one word, maybe landscape architecture is scale, maybe architecture is space. And when you look at the work that we do, I would say that our discipline sort of spans this sort of range of scales, from small, intimate gardens, which I have done very small sort of art-based installations, and students can work on these kind of things, and construction detailing and materials, and really celebrating craft and building, all the way up to large regional landscapes. And one of the studios I teach here is the Regional Landscape Systems Studio. And with that, I'm looking at really large chunks of southern Alberta, and kind of approaching, maybe not necessarily problems, because some of them don't have solutions, but how do you address matters at a regional scale, whether it's environmental. Obviously, Alberta is quite obsessed with its oil and gas economy of the, versus Well, there is the reality of oil and gas elsewhere in the world, but Alberta's government, for some reason, keeps sticking to it. And so, you know, we've got a landscape of small towns, agriculture, oil and gas, and, you know, essentially you've got this cultural landscape, you've got ecology out there, and how do all these things intermingle? And, you know, when I say things aren't necessarily problems, if you look at small towns that have waning populations and the economy doesn't change, how do you save the small town? Or can you? Or is this just a matter of how things are progressing? So, you know, part of what we're looking at, and this is the same with all the disciplines, is some of the problems don't have an easy solution. And we're looking at projective thinking. And the studio space is where we take our history courses, our theory courses, construction, in planning, it might be participatory planning techniques, and you meld all of this stuff together in one course that's looking at one place and trying to address the future of this place. And, you know, I think Alberta's a case in point of a place where there's a lot of conflicts within itself, and many places have that. But, you know, I'm someone who came from Berkeley, which is obviously very socially and environmentally conscious. And you got to ask yourself, do you want to tackle these problems by preaching to the converted, or do you want to come someplace where it's a bit more challenging? And, you know, here, how do you preach environmental responsibility and adapting to climate change in a place that's obsessed with its oil and gas industry? So that's something I find a bit more interesting, and it's definitely an interesting setting to put yourself in. Jen, do you want us to talk about portfolio, or do you want that to be like question round 2?
Yeah, we'll do that in the next round.
Okay. And, you know, just a final wrap up, landscape architecture on one end can be right next to art. And there's actually books on land art and the art community and landscape architecture. And then it can span all the way to the other side with environmental engineering. It can get close to planning. It can get close to architecture. In a certain sense, we might be the glue or the translators between a lot of these different disciplines. So if you like variety and communication between disciplines, it's a great place to be. All right, thanks.
Thanks, Chris. And now Jason can speak about Architecture Studio. Thanks.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Johnson, and I've been teaching here at the University of Calgary in the architecture program for, I think, something like 12 years. And over that time, we've developed and built on a studio culture that I think is shared among lots of let's say design schools, but has some unique qualities that maybe I'll talk a little bit about today. So obviously for incoming students, there are students who would be coming into the foundation stream, which is for students maybe with no design background at all, or coming from countries without sort of reciprocity agreements to enter into the M1 year of the program. And those studios really focus on, of course, design thinking and working through problems at a variety of scales, typically on the scale of, let's say, a pavilion and a house, and then sort of multi-unit housing kind of builds up through the 2 semesters. But the studios also focus on how you learn to integrate digital tools into your design thinking process. So the architecture program here at University of Calgary is really focused on preparing students for working in sort of, let's say, digitally intense environments where both your design and presentations and even how we fabricate things are all dealt with through a combination of critical thinking and, let's say, analog tools like using your hands and drawing, but really focused as well on being able to use new software for both designing and simulating projects and testing your ideas with, let's say, simulations that look at how environmentally sound your proposals might be. We might be looking at the energy analysis of the project, structural analysis, things like that. And so it's important that students are able to master those skills in a digital format so that we can do those, let's say, tests of what you guys come up with in Design Studio. Then the other studios are focused on sort of building on this knowledge. So in the second year of the program, we have a comprehensive studio, which looks at designing a building all the way through to sort of drawing the kinds of drawings you would start to hand off to contractors. It looks at health and safety within those environments, and really how we integrate some of the technical aspects of design, like structures and mechanical systems, into the projects themselves. And then in the final year of the program, we have some really interesting studio experiences. One of them is a study abroad program. And in the past, students have gone to Tokyo and Barcelona. I think they'll continue to do that. And we'll be adding a few other experiences to that, I think, including Francisco's taking students to Zurich. And in the past, we've had students go to Mexico and a few other places as well. And for students who are unable to travel during that semester, which happens the summer before your final year, we have a studio focused on cities within the context of Canada and North America. And so, you know, I think that's a really exciting opportunity for students. It's something that students, as far as the studio culture, it allows students to go in a cohort together to another city and kind of learn to live and work together, which is a great experience. A new studio that we've just started this year is the Work Integrated Learning Studio, and that happens at your penultimate semester, so the semester before your final one, in which students will be, they're working with either faculty members or with industry professionals on design research projects. And so those projects run the gamut. This semester we have people working on a couple of speculative proposals for projects in other cities, as well as some rehab projects for, one of them is for an old hotel in a small town in the Rockies, down to very specific, let's say, technically focused projects on rehabbing spaces, existing spaces on campus for sound performance. And so the idea is that within those options, students have the opportunity to network with professionals and faculty members around very specific areas of design research. And then the final studio students will take is really focused on their themes, and students pick within that structure of themes and then work on a project that's really sort of self-directed in a lot of ways, focused on that theme. And so that's the kind of content of studio. I think in terms of the culture of studio, one of the things I would recommend maybe for students who want to, let's say, look at different aspects of the school, I would say you can either follow, I'm doing this for Vita, but you could follow the Instagram feed, which has lots of images and information about things that have happened over the last few years. And if you go back far enough, you'll go to the time before COVID. So you'll get some sense of the kinds of things that we get up to as a school and the kinds of projects that we participate in. And so I would encourage people to do that. The other, another place that you can find some of that information is by contacting some of our current and former students. And I think, you know, the SA here has an email address that maybe Jen could share with you guys later, but it allows you to reach out to those students. But I think the big thing of focus within our studio and design culture here at the University of Calgary is that you're learning as much from one another as you're learning from your instructors. And it's really important for students to work in an environment that's sort of, let's say, collegial, but also collaborative and shared spaces throughout the building as well as on our downtown location. So I don't have too much more about that. I'm happy to answer questions about that later. But I think now we're moving on to the next segment of this. So I'll pass it back to Jen.
Thanks, Jason. We can stop here for a couple of minutes if anyone has questions around studio, or we can carry on with the portfolio presentations and then answer all the questions at the end. But I'll just ask right now, does anyone have any questions they want to start with? You can do it through the chat or you can just speak. Okay, well, I think then we can move on. Francisco, do you mind starting with the portfolios?
Yes, I can do that. Just gonna bring something that I had up here. I guess to first start with, especially since in planning, if some of you are looking at other schools, you might see that other schools are not requiring portfolio as part of your application package. So just to give you a bit background of why we do that in planning is because we believe that in order for you to really be able to plan a place, you need to visualize spatially what the place should be. So we call it form-based planning. So that form really drives what your strategies are, what your policies are going to be, recommendations, all sorts of things. In planning, I mean, there's a wide variety of what you can do when you graduate in terms of your practice. But it's very important to understand the space and be able to visualize and illustrate space so that then you can then draft and direct some sort of a policies in a plan. That's why it's important for you to show us how you think spatially. And this is why the portfolio is really useful for us to understand what is your spatial understanding, what kind of skills in terms of analyzing and designing and thinking about space do you have. There's a combination. We want you to show a combination of skills in terms of spatial skills that are based on computers or computer skills, and also hand drawings, because sketching is also an important part of the process of understanding space. And I know that we usually get applications from a wide variety of disciplines. Some of you might never had any experience to do with anything that has to do related to a portfolio. So I've seen in the chat that some of you are not going to be applying, let's say, this next term, but you are still starting your bachelor. So it's a great time right now to start to build some of those skills, because the more skills that you bring in terms of spatial understanding, the better. And the more of that you can have in your portfolio showing us, the better chances you have to not only be accepted, but also to be successful in the program. Maybe I can show some of the portfolios. These are some of the high quality portfolios we have had over the years. Let me see, share the screen here. Okay, so this is a portfolio that starts to show a series of different skills, right? This was an analysis of a space, and the applicant is telling us the different pieces of the space. You can see that there's maps of different scales. That's something also that we like to look at, something that looks at different sizes of spaces. There's hand drawings at the bottom. There is plan view. There is some three-dimensional drawings. I mean, this applicant already quite had a significant amount of experience in terms of planning. So you don't get too intimidated, as if you don't have any of this kind of drawings yet. What we like to look at is still some descriptions of how you visualize space. So. And one thing that it was good about the arrangement of this portfolio is it went from a larger scale to a smaller scale, where it starts to talk about this was just some renderings of interior spaces. And what we really want to look at is how you think about space, how do you understand it. So, for example, this first image is also useful because in some cases you might have more, not a lot of drawings, but more about photography, right? And photos of spaces, of places that you have been, how you can incorporate this into a portfolio. And for us to understand what you're thinking about this space is, if you take the photo and then you talk about it, you can even sketch and make some annotations on top of the photo that allow us to understand how you're thinking about space. Why is that space important? I mean, there are photographs that sometimes come in the portfolio that are about an artistic expression in terms of what the composition of the photo is. But in other cases, the photo is trying to depict or show a space that you really liked when you were traveling. And you don't even need to travel, but it could be about the place where you live. Maybe there's a part in your town, city, of the public realm that you really like, or nature as well that you really like, and you can have photographs of this space and trying to explain what is it that you like about it, and how do you understand why that is a successful space, for example. So even annotations on top of a photograph, or a small paragraph narrative explaining that, it's something that is useful for us. This is another example. I mean, again, this is a portfolio that is very much for someone that has an architectural background. So it has a lot of computer drawings at different scales, and this clearly for us very easy to understand that this person has spatial skills in both hand drawings and computer drawings. But I wanted to make an emphasis that you don't need to have these drawings or these skills yet. If you have time to develop these skills, there's a lot of online courses that you can take, or if you're still in university, then there are some courses that you can take that are about spatial analysis skills. Some of the and I'll stop sharing right now. Some of the courses that you can take as well are on GIS. GIS is Geographic Information Systems, and this is a way of analyzing space, and it can be used for many different disciplines. So you can look at your university if there are courses around that to start to build some of those skills as well. But if you're planning on applying to the school in this next application period in the winter, then I recommend that you try to compile all of these ideas of space that you have had in terms of photographs. If you have hand drawings, you can also do a quick hand drawing course online. Sketching is really important for us as planners. It doesn't have to be a perfect sketch, but you need to be able to show in a meeting with either a member of the public, or a municipality, or a developer, need to explain in a quick sketch what the idea of the space is. So you could take some sketching online courses and use those skills, practice those skills to maybe illustrate some of the spaces that you really like. Like I said, if you have traveled, where places that are memorable to you, plazas, streets, anything that has to do with the public realm is really important. Even indoor spaces are good too. And if you haven't traveled much around your communities, I am sure there are places that are positive and even places that are negative. You can also talk about those, sketch and say, I really have an issue with this. You might not know exactly why something doesn't work as a good space, but you can still express what are your concerns or what it could be better, right? So using that online sketching course and then your examples that you have fresh in your mind that you have experienced, it could be something as well that you add to your portfolio. So that would be something that you can build on. And if you have spatial analysis skills, then bring those in and explain to us what is it that you learn from those particular drawings that you're presenting. And that's also important for us to know what is it that you did in this particular drawing and why was it helpful? What did you learn from that? Small paragraphs, not a lot of text, because we have a lot of applications. We're not going to read everything, but small paragraphs, small messages of what you learn will be really useful.
Thanks, Francisco. And Jason, do you want to go next and talk about architecture portfolios?
Yes. Sorry, I was trying to find my mute button. So, so I think I would agree with sort of everything that Francisco has said in terms of being able to demonstrate a range of skills. You know, I think one of the things we're looking at least I'm looking at when I review architecture portfolios, is trying to find a little bit out about students in terms of a point of view, and what students may be doing that's gives their portfolio a bit of personality. I think one of the things that that happens when students who haven't maybe put together a portfolio before is a lot of people kind of download the templates from different sources and then just populate it with their work. And I think that can be okay to some extent, but from the point of view of a reviewer, you guys tend to have a very similar affinity for which templates you choose. So often the first page of like 20 of them are the same thing. So I would recommend that if you do download a template, which is useful maybe for layout and spacing things out, that you make it your own in some way and try to communicate a bit about why you're interested in design. And that may mean that some of the images and things that you show are, let's say, really specific to you. So it could be like Francisco's talking about a space that you find interesting, and you write some things about why that space is interesting. It may be a project that you did, and you try and explain, you know, what your goals for the project were, or let's say your inspiration for the project. And again, keeping it short, because, you know, we get 300 plus applications, and by the time you've gone through them all, it's important to be able to remember, you know, oh, I like that one that had that very specific thing happening, and then you go back and sort of take a look at them. So those would just be general comments. I think as far as examples, so I think also there are examples posted to that page that I've just linked in the chat. that go through different, let's say, years of students. I'll look at just two of those really quickly here. So and Jen, if you could just let me know if you're not seeing these, that'd be great. But I think.
No, I think you're good.
Okay. So this is a portfolio for entering in the foundation program. So the expectation is that, you know, probably there may not be a lot of, let's say, design work around buildings or structures or landscapes in them, but instead some of the other, let's say, creative work that a student or an applicant would have done. So the student has organized fairly clearly their work. Most of it's, you know, around graphics and drawing. And so I think it's a nice, again, you know, zooming in and out on the work, but this has a kind of nice, simple layout and lets the work itself do the talking. I think there's a little bit of information in here about what, you know, what's important to the student. And so this is a really good application for foundation year. Obviously, this person had a little bit of a background in design to start out with. I will say in the architecture program, because of the number of applications we receive, that the bar can be quite high in terms of, you know, we're comparing across a large group of applications in terms of trying to put together a portfolio. And so if you have other ways to talk about why you might be a good candidate, even if your, let's say, design background isn't quite as strong, that's important to try and do. This is another example of a student with, let me see if I can shrink this. Applying for the foundation year, the student has a little less, let's say, experience in terms of maybe fine art drawing, but submitted some woodworking projects, you know, along with the drawings and a design process, and tried to kind of contextualize this work in a way that communicated their interest in the built environment, right? So again, I think this is a student with, let's say, a lot less background experience applying for the foundation year. So all of these are on that link that you sent. This last one is a student applying to the M1 program, and probably from the minor in architecture. I can't remember exactly what Cody's background was, but looking at the work, it looks like something that probably happened here. And so for a student applying from the minor, obviously we have some semesters of looking at their work, but if you were applying from like U of T or Dalhousie or somewhere where you had completed an undergrad and you were entering into the M1, this is the kind of projects you would be submitting. And so again, this goes through the kind of thought process for the projects and different scales of drawing. So a few different scales of projects, and then some other projects that may have happened outside of the context of being in the program here. So anyway, I think that's I would say the important thing is really trying to communicate your personality as well as your skills. Not so much that we're judging people's personality, but I think we're interested in what the point of view of your work is and how, you know, how committed you are to understanding what you're doing. Because this process, the studio process, is pretty intense, and it requires students to be like really excited about it. Otherwise, it's much fun. So you're trying to communicate your excitement about your work in the portfolio. 9:42 exactly, Jen.
Nice work.
Your little plan there.
Okay, thanks, Jason. And Chris, if you could do some for landscape architecture.
Yeah, so I think the first thing, and especially reading the chat here, is to emphasize that your background does not matter. And in fact, your background being from something that has nothing to do with design may actually be one of the best things you have going for you. We have cohorts made up of everyone from everywhere, and that's really what makes it interesting. And as I've said, we want to see spatial thinking. We want to know that you enjoy making things. And yeah, we want to see unique personal expression, and yeah, risk taking is great as well. But mostly we want to know that your thinking could translate into spatial thinking, no matter where you came from. And for those of you without a design background, the greatest irony is those students who have, let's say, a background in architecture or landscape architecture who go into another discipline, they have to unlearn before they can relearn. So don't think that you're at a disadvantage. Design can be very complex in that way. So other things you can do, all of our disciplines have books on graphics. And if it's drawing the landscape, you can learn how to draw, right? That's Chip Sullivan's book. That was my advisor once upon a time in grad school. And this book is from a series representing landscapes. And this one's called Hybrid. This is hybrid graphics. This means analog, hand-drawn graphics mixed with digital. So don't think that you have to do things a particular way. Just like they've shown you some portfolios, and I'll show you a couple here that have a variety of work. We've had everything from tattoo artists showing their work from their shop, and this was a student who was in our program, to someone who had a background in environmental engineering, and her portfolio showed pictures of restoration works where it just looks like photographs of plants, but it was an engineering project. So you get these really wide swings in work. So I'm going to share my screen now, and I'll even show you something from my portfolio to show you that what thoughts you have can really lend themselves towards design. So right now I'm showing you my desktop, and there's a real project. That's a roof garden project I did in San Francisco, right? Look at, there's detailing, there's materials. This is my first drawing. I'm pretty sure everybody here can do this. This is hot garbage. Or this is my first thoughts about how to design this place. So you're also going to find that there's extremely well-known, famous architects, landscape architects, who have drawings that look like this. They're published, but it's the thinking behind it. And yes, they become more refined and more refined and more refined, but thinking has to start somewhere. And so I've got a couple of portfolios here. We'll start with Justin's. He's a recent grad. He works locally, and he had a background in fine art. And you can see that. And in as much as you're like, oh God, this guy can draw, and yes, he can, very much so, his challenge was, how do you take on the computer? And, don't think that anything you have as a skill set is going to limit you. And don't also assume that one skill set is going to take you all the way to the finish line. And here, of course, he's an Alberta native, so here's his commentary on gasoline. And so, you know, we've got some hand drawing, we've got a little bit of Photoshop here. And, you know, he came in with a certain background, which lends itself well to a portfolio, but by the same measure, there's new skills to learn. Emma is a student currently in the program. She's in her final year, and she had a background as a major in philosophy with some art as well. So, of course, she starts hers with philosophical statement before moving into the work. And, you know, this, you know, varies. There's art pieces. Obviously, she took some courses, and, you know, if you can draw, you can draw. But also remember, making is making. And in as much as we've got all these pieces here, which are translatable, working in different mediums, there's a lot of things you can do here. Now, one thing I will emphasize is photography isn't quite as special as it used to be. I, for example, and I'm sure Jason and Francisco can share this same story, I had to use film. If I took a photo, I had to pay money to see what it looked like. Every time, every photo. Now, camera's like a machine gun. You can just push that button to your heart's content. So if you're going to do photography, you've got to do something. And here, you know, we've got, you know, some interesting landscapes within Alberta. We've got some, you know, it's black and white. We've got different focal lengths and sort of, you know, lens types used here. You've got to take it up a notch. You can't rely on photography. It's great. It can complement things, but you've got to really put a critical eye to it and say, is this special? And when you get down to actual photographers, they generally pump out about 1,000 shots before they have one that they think is truly special. So that's a pretty low percentage. But with this work, you can see some raw forms of expression all the way up to, you know, the first ones Francisco showed, which had quite refined pieces. And obviously the portfolios for someone coming in with a 2-year degree versus a 3-year degree, they're going to be different. And, you know, those of you who have experience with design, whether it's a master or a bachelor's of environmental design at, let's say, Manitoba or UBC, or if you're from, let's say, China and have gone to Beijing Forestry University and you've got your portfolio there, you know, it's going to have a certain level of development. But you've seen a variety of work here, and as long as we can see that thinking and that uniqueness and that specialness in there and that potential, that's going to matter. And if you're worried about hand graphics, and maybe you have a degree in biochemistry, but you have an A average, that also tells us something. That tells us that you got an A in biochemistry, and the 3 of us probably would have failed out of the program. So always bear that in mind too. You know, we'll appreciate smart coming in, and the portfolio is part of an overall package. And if that's the case with you, you do your best to show us what you can, that you want to take your thinking from this one world and put it into another. So I think that's about all I've got for my soapbox.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, so now we have some time to take questions. We do have one in the chat from Jen. What kind of program can we use for building our portfolio? So I'm assuming you're asking about software. So I don't know, Jason, do you want to take that one?
Sure. You can really use anything, to be honest. Not anything, never mind. But you can use, like at the most simple level, you can use PowerPoint or what the equivalent of that might be in, I'm not a Mac user, so I don't know what that would be, but which has really simple layout tools, right? You just drop images into it and format them to be either, we're reviewing all of these on a screen, so you could format them to be kind of a screen dimension. People have used, we don't usually know what they use because in the end, you're just converting it to a PDF to send to us. So some I'm sure have used even Word or something like that. But so I think there's lots of things you can use. Typically at school, you're going to start learning to put things together in InDesign, which is more focused on kind of the workflow of documents and putting documents together. So if you want to try something like InDesign, that would be a great place to start. I don't know if people have other suggestions, but.
I would say don't use Photoshop. Photoshop is for photos. Yeah, this will be a big thing about what we're going to teach you, is each of those softwares has a particular purpose. But in terms of things that come with packages, if you have Microsoft Office, PowerPoint will be good enough if you can't right now afford or don't want to commit to the Adobe Creative Cloud and get InDesign. Keynote is an equivalent. I'm sure Google has a free equivalent. I just don't know what that's called. Microsoft Word will be a torture box for you. So I would say avoid that. At least something that is meant to show a visual layout, and at least something like a PowerPoint at a minimum is some sort of visual layout. I would suggest, now that Jason's brought up this whole thing of templates, wipe the template. Don't use one. Make your own. I'm sure, I've made my own template. I've changed it over the years. That would be probably the strongest thing to do, is just make it clean and simple. Avoid hyper collage. Let the work, shine through. Don't over design the portfolio. If you want us to focus on the work in the portfolio, keep it minimal, simple.
Okay, we have another question. Would these portfolio ideas also be relevant for the minor in architecture? So yeah, we do require a small digital portfolio for application to the minor. So Jason, maybe do you want to take that one, please?
Yeah, I think it's the same, the sort of same main ideas. I think in the minor, we do pay attention to both the portfolio and GPA. So I think those two things are, if you're weaker on your GPA, you'll want to focus a bit more time on your portfolio.
Thanks. Okay, so should portfolios have a consistent theme or message across all of the items?
I'll tackle that. I think that's maybe a bit premature unless you've got a very particular agenda or reason as to why you're applying to a particular design discipline. Otherwise, as stated, we want to see that you've got a critical eye, you enjoy making, and that some unique aspect of this craft is starting to come through. Once you finish your degree, then portfolios start getting very particularized depending on what kind of firm you apply to for jobs, etc.
Thanks, Chris. So Olga's asking, how translatable are the programs throughout different provinces and the US? I think the short answer is they are reciprocal, so you are eligible to practice in the US and other provinces. But maybe I'll ask each of the three profs just to quickly touch on what that looks like. So Francisco, can you start for planning?
Sure. Yes. So in the registration process as a professional planner, you are, let's say the shortest route is to have graduated from a program that is certified, recognized, accredited. So in terms of planning, our program is across Canada. So if you graduate from our program, you can start doing your hours, and you are on track for being a registered professional planner across Canada, and it's also recognized in the US. So it also gets you started on the process for the US.
And Jason, for architecture?
Yeah, so it's very similar. We have reciprocal degree arrangements with the US and as well with Mexico for architecture education. Each province in Canada has agreed to accept the degrees of all the schools that are accredited in Canada, and so we're one of those. And currently, Canada and the EU are finalizing an agreement around reciprocity of degrees for acceptance into licensure between Canada and the EU. So, which is unlikely the case right now with degrees in the US. So there is one advantage for Canada right now in that regard. And there are a few other agreements with a group of countries that changes a bit each year, but that covers a lot of other countries that have similar education systems to Canada. And so the degrees from the U of C are very portable around the world. And I think that's not just the case for architecture, but for sure within architecture, it's a well-recognized degree.
Thanks. And Chris, you mentioned something in the chat. Do you want to elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, so essentially the licensing exam is the same for the US and Canada. So reciprocity there is very, very simple. And then in terms of where you can take this degree outside of the US and Canada, it's easier to have our degree move into other jurisdictions than vice versa. I would have to look into more detail. I'm not sure, but if you think of the world broken up into chunks, like Australia, New Zealand have similar structures, there's a lot of effort to work with Asia and the Pacific Rim. Obviously, that's there's a lot of economic connections and conferences which have been trying to tie North America and Asia together over the last 10 years plus. But yeah, Jen, that may be something we've got to make a spreadsheet on with China, India, Middle East, Central Asia, Europe, North America, and I guess the Pacific Rim. But as Jason mentioned, all these organizations are pushing toward making things more universal because there's so many firms that have offices in multiple countries, and because of this, it just makes sense for everything to start getting on the same page. That being said, overall, generally the scrutiny of the exams and the complexity of the exams in the US and Canada tend to be pretty top tier in terms of what they're expecting of you overall, which is why they translate well.
Okay, thanks. Francisco, we have a question about planning portfolio. Alexander says, I've done some interior design work within my own home, as well as some more basic planning work through my undergraduate program. Would these be appropriate for a planning portfolio?
Yes, both of those will be appropriate. It's important that you contextualize what you present in your portfolio about what is it that you did there. What, again, we're trying to have an idea what your skills are how you understand space, what your interest is, and like Jason said, what is within your personality, how you're approaching this discipline. What is it that you want to look into planning or explore in planning? So yeah, both of those are good to include.
Okay, Karen's asking, if given foundation as opposed to M1 with an architecture background, how do you go about waiving courses? So I think probably it is a case-by-case basis. You wouldn't be able to waive studio or graphics because they're the reason that we're asking you to do the foundation year. There is a chance you could be waived from the one or two of the history courses and the first building science course. And basically, people who are admitted to foundation year, once they're here, or once they're offered, they would send me an email and we would kind of go do it on a one-on-one basis. So the instructors do review all your course outlines, your transcripts, and then they decide if they feel that you've covered all the content of those courses. I hope that helps. Do we have any other questions before we end the session? Well, I really want to thank Jason and Francisco and Chris for helping out today. I hope they've helped answer your questions and give you a better feel for what studio is like and preparing to apply and getting your portfolio ready. We do have 2 portfolio review sessions we're going to be offering in November. The dates are on our website. Can you guys hear me? Okay, sorry. So if you can sign up right now for the 2 sessions, and then hopefully this week we'll have an actual time where you can sign up for the actual time slot that you'll get. We're working on that right now. Alima? So for your application, if you have an unofficial transcript that you can upload yourself, like a scan of the documents that you have, that is sufficient. If you're offered admission, we do require an official portfolio, or sorry, official transcript. So some schools are now emailing them directly. Some universities will email them to us. And eventually, hopefully, they'll be able to mail the hard copies if they are not doing it electronically, but that would be sorted out once you're offered admission. But for your application, it's fine, as long as you can upload something.
I guess the final word there is anything that's related to an institution these days, I would start working on that immediately. Everything's pretty plugged up across the board with any large institution or governmental body. You know, I know some places have gotten rid of deadlines for certain processes, but obviously we have deadlines. So if you're not sure, do it anyway. Get that paperwork taken care of, and then get on to the rest of it.
Yeah, good advice. All right, well, thanks everybody. Hopefully, we also have another session this tomorrow evening at 5 with some alumni of ours who will also talk about their studio experiences and some portfolio tips looking at application to school and employers. So thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.